Take it away. Take 4.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second Online with OnPoint.
We're rolling into week 3 of our Doubt It series. Can
Yes.
you talk about briefly just weeks 1 and 2?
Yeah, so we are in week 3. Our first week we talked about how we are not alone within our questions. And then last week we discussed the story of Gideon and how God does not shame our questions. And so this week we're entering how our questions don't always get answered. And we're going to talk about that and learn through that through the story of Job.
Through the story of Job, you know it's a pretty rough story, and how we understand in the things that we just don't understand. And so just kind of a preface in the intro into the story of Job. Job itself is a book of poetry that was written in the Old Testament, and it's actually one of 3 books that's considered the books of wisdom. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job all kind of speak into the direction of wisdom as it's given from God, not wisdom as sometimes we understand it and kind of in the human nature of things, but God's all-knowing wisdom. And part of that is kind of this continued wrestling narrative through all 3 books, really, is kind of that question of like, is God just? Is he fair? Is it through kind of how we understand as people get what they deserve? And all kind of have their own takes, and Proverbs kind of leans a little more into that direction of like, those who seek the good and the wisdom, and this is how God will prosper you. And then there's the other emphasis of, if you hang out with wicked people, you kind of naturally become wicked. So there's like that kind of nature of like, well, yeah, the decisions you make do factor in how you turn out and the things that develop. Ecclesiastes kind of challenges that a little bit and explores different thoughts of things happening in which
Aren't fair.
Right, or that, in our understanding of things that people don't deserve happening, which really comes into depth when we start looking at Job, because Job really gets hit with some stuff that he doesn't deserve. But in all of this, I think this is huge. Before we really dive in, because we're going to get in here in a second, but like when you start looking at Jesus, there's so much of the context of how we relate to the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Jobs, and the nature of how we wrestle with Jesus in a culture and a society that functions off of you get what you deserve. You have to work to achieve. You have to
solve a problem to get an answer, or you have to do something that's going to equate to getting a response or a conclusion or an answer to something. But I think the story of Job kind of plays into how there's not always an answer. And so I think as Justin jumps into the story, it'll be a good understanding of how to cope with not always having those answers.
Yeah. But within that, part of what I was getting to is that as we explore it in our realm of understanding, the very nature of the good news and gospel of Jesus is the story of us getting the thing that we don't deserve.
Oh, yes.
And so I think that's, obviously in Jesus' light, that was positive in nature of bringing us hope and freedom and eternity. In Job's scenario of getting what he didn't deserve was kind of the difficult,
opposite.
The suffering that comes along with that. And so, which actually, if you look at Job's name meaning, and I talked about a little bit of this last week, I'm a really big believer in the meaning of names, especially in Scripture, because it just explains so much of how things kind of walk through. But the Hebrew name Job actually translates to persecuted or hated, which I think is interesting as we read about a guy who is actually held to pretty high esteem by God. But again, all these things happen. And so Job 1:1, it says, "In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants." Listen to this. "He was the greatest man among all the people of the east. So what does that tell you right off the bat? What do we see in Job?
Job is a well-off, highly sought-out individual.
Yeah.
In the era that he's living.
Part of that too is for him to say that he was blameless and upright in the eyes of God, and he feared God and shunned evil. Right, meaning that everything that he had done and the ways he lived were in the ways of God, which again may have been. And what we're going to read in a second was part of how we wrestle and understand, is that the reason he has the things he has? Which, again, if you fast forward down to verse 6, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, so this is Satan, literally means the opposer, the one who opposes. So God is sitting here with all his angels present, and Satan came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And listen to this. Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." I mean, isn't that kind of a crazy thought, even as we understand today and kind of this spiritual battle that we have going on and living within our faith, is the understanding that there is an opposition that is roaming just back and forth, putting stumbling blocks in our way, wanting to cause us to fail and fall away from a relationship with God. And this is that same thing, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him." Again, the greatest of the men of the East, God's saying there's no one on earth that's quite like Job. There's something different about him and the way that he's living. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. This is where it gets interesting. Does Job fear God for nothing? Like, what's the premise of Job's faith and understanding of God here? Is it just because, or have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has in your power, but not the man himself, do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And that's when we get to the part of Job where all kind of the destruction breaks loose. He loses his family, loses his wife, loses his children, loses all of his livestock, all those 7,000 sheep and the 3,000 camels and the 500 donkeys, all those things. He loses all of it, all of his well-being, with the exception of him dying. If anything bad could happen to this man, it happens. But it's not because he deserved it. It's not because he did anything wrong, which again is part of the story as you fast forward, is all these friends start coming up to Job, and it's like, well, there has to be an explanation to why these things are happening. But what Satan was saying is, and this is really kind of the depth of where my brain works, but how I begin to understand some of this stuff is Satan believes that the only reason that Job has a faith is because he's being blessed. Like, he's got an inheritance, he's got well-being, he's got health, he's got family. And I think so often, how does that represent our faith? Because when things are going good, how easy is it to kind of put praise, and lift up God's name and go to church and be happy. But then when things get difficult, how much difficult then does faith begin to live out?
And I understand where it could be difficult, but within the lens of even Job's circumstances, never once did he question what God was doing in his life, because it was blessings upon blessings
up until this point.
And so Job was thankful, and he praised God and said, "Oh, thank you for this, thank you for that." But never was there a questioning of, why is this happening to me? Whereas when we notice that he's faced with all these trials and all this devastation and all this brokenness, is where he's like, "God, why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
And so I think that's the interesting, not that he's not praising God before or after or anything like that, but within the questioning of that, where that doubt starts to creep in of why are these things happening to me? And even with his friends, when his friends do come and try to ask him, what did you do? Why did these negative things basically ruin your life.
Yeah.
You had to have done something.
Yeah. And really, in so much of our faith is built upon a foundation of things we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in the midst of his faith in God, as things are happening, he still doesn't have all the answers, which I think is oftentimes when we make decisions to follow Jesus and follow God, I think a lot of times we expect to just have things kind of figured out or have questions that we've had for years answered, and that's not always the reality. And that's the case in Job, is he always seems throughout the story to remain faithful, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have questions, he doesn't have doubts. In chapter 2 is essentially where all of this stuff continues to happen in his well-being. And then by chapter 3 is again, it's a book of poetry. So it's an entire chapter of him literally crying out, why? Like, even to the point of he's asking, why was I even born?
Yeah.
Like, that's a pretty deep question. But again, it's part of that nature. Even in his faith, there are things that are unknowing. There's things that are uncertain. There's questions he has. There's explanations he wants. Which I think is why we started off this series with "You're not alone in your questions." Is, man, no matter where you are in your faith journey, we all have questions. We all have doubts. We all have uncertainties. And the reality is I don't know that we'll ever fully know everything that God knows. Because part of this is we're talking about a relationship we have in a God that is all knowing. He's not bound by space and time. He's the creator of all things. Like, that's who we're seeking to understand, but we're like, he's immortal, we're mortal. He's all knowing, we're limited. He's not bound by time. We kind of have a time limit here on earth. Yes, we have an invitation into eternity with God, but he's always been, he always will, and he always will continue to be. And so, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And so the story continues in Job, where he's wrestling. Why? His friends are wrestling. Why? And they keep coming back up to him. And the thing I love about Job in all of this, and yes, he has his moments of doubts and his questions, and he's kind of on this roller coaster ride, as we all would be if this would, I think of how difficult it would actually be to lose one family member. And for some of you in that situation, if you've lost grandparents or parents or you may be sitting in that boat, and dealing with that loss and that grief and that emotion is a roller coaster in itself. He not only just lost his spouse, he lost his 10 kids, his 7 sons, his 3 daughters, all of his inheritance, his livestock, his well-being, his home, somewhat of his health. I mean, it's just, I couldn't imagine trying to funnel the emotions and the thoughts that were going through his head. But again, time and time again, does he defend God? He defends his faith. He never, in the midst of him questioning and doubting, I don't know that he ever puts his faith on the line of getting to a place of unbelief, which again goes into what we've been talking about the last few weeks of what's the direction you're letting your doubts lead you. Are you letting your doubts and questioning and reasoning lead you closer to God, or are we allowing those things to lead us further away from God? And as all seasons of life are different, just like Job's, I mean, he's in a situation where, yes, he's asking, but it leads him to a point, and this is where I feel like part of the climax of the story of Job starts hitting in verse 37, 38, 39. But it's literally, Job gets to a point where he cries out to God, and he says, like, essentially, I demand you to come down and talk to me, speak to me face to face. And God does, which again, in itself, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, what are your thoughts when you hear, like, in the midst of all of this, we have a God that's never leaving our side, similar to Gideon's story last week, of in the midst of the questioning and the doubts, he's still there. And upon the time that we call out and cry out to him, he responds. Like, how powerful is that?
Oh, I think there are no words to describe what that could look like and what that could be. And even within the story of Job, because, I mean, it's very evident that God is there throughout everything that's happening within his story. And I think that Job sees that and he senses that. But there's still this roller coaster of emotions for him. Like, I believe I'm going to defend my faith, but why? Why is this happening to me? What did I do? caused all of this. And so then when Job finally does call to God and cries out and says, please just come to me, and I need to see you. I need something. God comes down and he still doesn't give Job an answer. He tells Job about his creation and all the intricacies within the world and all the things that he looks over that we don't know about, that we'll never know about, things that we just cannot understand or ever comprehend. The detail and the care that goes behind what God does each and every single day, never mind what he's done throughout the world from the beginning of time. And so I think that that jaw-dropping experience for Job, although he didn't get what he asked God for, he asked God, tell me why you did this, and God gives him a response in, this is the world that I created, these are the things that happen, this is how they happen, and he leaves it at that.
I don't know, part of me thinks that Job reaching out to God, in the back of his mind, he probably is thinking he wants answers, but I don't think it's what he needs or what he was searching for. To me, he doesn't get an answer, he gets the experience. And like, how deep is that? In so often we get caught in us searching for answers rather than searching for the experience. But give me an experience of God any day over, I don't know, I just couldn't imagine what that would have been like, but to have the experience. And so in this case, in Job's case, this was an actual storm, and a storm kind of arose out, this massive storm cloud, and he begins to speak to Job. A fire truck outside our window. We live 3 doors down from the fire station, so that's a normal occurrence. But in chapter 38, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Right? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footing set? Who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. How much perspective does this give Job in this moment where he's looking at it, and probably a very humbling experience of saying, because in this moment, God's not giving him answers. He's not explaining that, the Satan came forward and kind of challenged him within this, and that there was this deal upon God giving the Satan, an opportunity to kind of test and strip things away, almost as an example or a proof that faith doesn't have to be dependent on our rewards. Faith doesn't have to be dependent on blessing. That faith is rooted in something deeper that comes from within, right? And so, God doesn't explain all that to Job. That's all. Job doesn't understand that, doesn't know that. But what Job is learning through this experience is how vast and how immense God is. And God is a big, big God. And yes, are there things that we don't understand? Absolutely. He's a big God. He created, entire galaxies. Of course, there's parts of God that we just can't understand. Does it make it difficult? Yeah. Does it make it challenging all the time? Do we struggle from time to time with that? Yes. But do I believe that's why faith is so powerful and so meaningful, when you can step into a relationship unknowing of what's going to happen? And I think that's just what's so powerful in this moment of God God doesn't need to give you answers. But man, what a powerful moment is it for us to understand and to have an experience with God the Father, the creator of the universe, the one who knows all, who's not bound by the things that we're bound by. Again, part of it's just unthinkable, unfathomable. I just don't know how I would process that. But in all of it, especially as we get to a point now where we need to wrap up, of it sure makes you think. And again, we kind of gave this, the spoiler alert at the beginning of anytime we're talking about that there are questions that don't always get answered, as we explore that, that's more of a statement than an exploration, right? It's just part of it, until we're in the presence of God, fully, in the heavenly realm with him, I think there are just going to be some things that we don't know. And there, I don't even, maybe in the full presence of God, maybe there's things we don't know, but all of which I think are so important to our reliance and dependence on him, and why faith is so valuable, why faith is so important. I keep cutting you off, sorry.
Trying to find a way to get in there. I think that within this whole story, and trying to just go about Job's experience and understanding the things that happen, or even not understanding and being okay with it. But the biggest thing that stood out to me as we've gone through this story, and as we've discussed Job, no one understands why the things that happened to Job happened. He did nothing wrong to deserve those things that happened to him. But we know that at the end of his story, they talk about his humility and the person he became after that experience. So I know you said there was an experience that you would take that over anything rather than understanding and knowing all that. But I truly believe that within each of those experiences, God has purpose within that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For the outcome of what that would look like for us in our lives. So for Job, that experience, that brokenness and that despair and his experience with God led to his humility and how he displayed that the rest of his life. So for me, I think that although we're all experiencing despair, we're all experiencing doubt, we all experience struggle, and we might not ever get answers. But I think within that, just like Job, God was still there in the midst of all of that. Yet there was still purpose behind all the things that were experienced. Yeah. And so I think that it's important to know that regardless of where you are in life, regardless of whether it's a blessings pouring out onto your life, or whether it is a struggle, whether it is filled with despair and brokenness, knowing that at the end of it all, there is going to be purpose for it that we may not see.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I've even encountered moments like that in my life that kind of speak into that. But yeah, I mean, and that's a part of that again, and why we communicate this to you guys so much too, is we talk about identity a lot. And for you all to understand that your identity is placed in what God says about you is because of how purposeful God is. God has created everything with the intention of it to be good, right? We're the ones who have warped that. We're the ones who have made things that he intended for good and made them not so good. But but again, within that reality is God is a very purposeful God. He created things with purpose and with intention. That's why our bodies work the way they work. That's why photosynthesis works the way it works. That's why the world revolves around the sun. That's why the earth rotates on its axis. That's why we have seasons, is that every season serves a different purpose. Summer is different than winter. Fall is different than spring. Like everything that we see in the humanity around us, in the world around us, in the nature around us is spoken into existence with purpose. And so I think that has to be put into perspective as we explore this reality, that there are just things we don't know and there's things that we don't understand. Yes, but I think that's what makes it faith. And really, I think is rooted in the question of where does your faith lie, right? Because that was Satan's understanding of Job is, no. Job only has faith because he's been rewarded with this, and he's been given this, and he has these things in life. Strip those away, and what do you leave a man with? No. But Job still had faith, which leads me to believe that our faith is not rooted and shouldn't be rooted in the things we have and the things we don't have, right? Just like our identity isn't grounded and pushed into existence from how good we are at something, how we excel at something, our achievements, our failures, what people are saying about us. No. It's what God has spoken into existence, because he's the one that marks it with purpose. He's the one that's given it vision. And yes, there are things in life that we don't understand. And we may not, but that's again what makes faith faith. So where does your faith lie in that? And how does that speak that purpose into existence in each of our lives? Because I think really deep down rooted in that is the story of Job. Yes, we read of a story of Job where there were things that happened to him that maybe shouldn't have happened, or things that he didn't deserve to happen. But even then, God had a plan for it and a purpose for it. I think it exposes a lot to us and how and that we actually have this story now. But even then, like there is an ending to the story of Job where he's actually given double everything that he had begun with. So he went from 10 kids to 20 kids. He went from 7,000 sheep to 14,000. Like his inheritance doubled because of his faithfulness. And I think of like how God, again, how we understand faith on earth, and how we live faith out, but we are also in our faith called co-heirs with Christ, which means that there's an inheritance being spoken in our dependency on him, right? Like there's a part of this element that if we remain faithful, even in the midst of our doubts, even in the midst of our questions, even when, things hit the fan and it just life gets hard, there's an element of this. If we remain faithful, if we continue to lean on our dependency and our reliance of God, if we continue to allow our questioning, our doubts to lead us closer into a more intimate relationship with God, there's going to become a day where we're going to inherit what Jesus, like we're going to be co-heirs with Christ, inheriting the things that God has set aside for us, which will be double, twofold than anything we're going to experience here on earth. And so I think that is something to look forward to be excited about, and to give us a different perspective in how we're living our lives in this story of Job. I think a part of this, I don't know that we completely answered and explored the reason why our questions don't always get answered. But I think that's the point. I just think that's the point. I think we're going to have questions, and we kind of have to be okay with that. And I think that's what makes faith so strong. So closing thoughts, how would you close?
I would obviously say that if you haven't already, read the story of Job. It's a long one. It's a beautiful story, tragic, heartbreaking, but I think all the things that we've talked about would be understood in a deeper, more understanding view within the story, but also within everything we've talked about, and not always having the answers, not understanding why things happen when they do, especially within this time that we're living in now. We don't have answers. We might not ever have answers. But knowing that God serves purpose within that, but also knowing that in a society that is so very, we want things now, we want things immediately, we want things to happen at this very second, knowing that that's not going to always happen in life. You're going to have to be patient. You're going to have to be okay with never having an answer, which includes patience and waiting. But I think it's important to understand that there's a bigger picture within all of the things God places and the purposes that he has, all these different events that happen within our lives. There's reason for it. There's a bigger picture that then revolves on just today. Yeah,
I think that's huge. And this is what I'll close with too, is Job is, like I started with, it's a part of a 3-book series on what's considered the books of wisdom, God's wisdom, and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. I think as we're given this inclination that we should actually be searching and striving for the wisdom of God, right? I think that's a good thing. But of those is what we learn in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes especially, but even in the story of Job, it's a little more narrative and reflection, even though it's poetry, is that wisdom comes with time. Wisdom comes with patience. Wisdom comes with perseverance. And so much of our faith, right? We deepen our faith in time. Like the nature of Jesus, right? And our belief and understanding of Jesus, our restoration comes in time. Like it's just like when you restore an old car. I don't know if you have any grandparents in your life that restore old cars, or parents that restore, maybe you restore old cars, I don't know. But restoration is timing. Like you got to rebuild an engine. You got to rework this. You got to include new this. Sometimes you have to line a new interior. Sometimes it needs new paint jobs. So, like that is what we're here on earth. I mean, it's like we think of it as like, man, 80, like we have years to figure these things out. But man, the reality is I know plenty of, I mean, I've had great grandparents, great great grandparents. You know, I've been blessed to live in a family where we've lived long lives, well into their 90s, and even all those experiences I've had, they'll still would say, yeah, there's plenty I don't know. There's plenty I don't like. And so, but wisdom increases in time. Our faith increases in time. Our relationship with Jesus becomes more intimate in time. I think that's with every relationship we have. I think that's just how God created it. Why this stuff is so valuable is it takes time. Or reading your Bible every day is meaningful because you just don't figure it out in one reading, in one setting. Like, it takes intentionality and discipline and reading and fervent prayer and resiliency and you know, and you get stronger and you developed, and that practice makes you stronger and develop more things in life. So yeah, I'll end it with that. Is stuff takes time. It's difficult. It's challenging. But I would encourage you to see this as an opportunity to grow deeper, as opposed to reasons to give up. Don't give up, right? In the great words of Jim Valvano, right? Don't give up. Don't ever give up. You know who Jimmy V is?
Yeah, from basketball. Right?
Yeah, that's good. There you go. Yeah. I want to pray, and then like I did last week, and then, or do you want to pray?
I can pray.
You can pray? All right. Rose's going to pray, and then I'll send us off.
Okay. Dear Lord, just thank you for allowing us the opportunity to gather together, even though we're not together in person. Thank you for technology and a way for us to grow closer to you and learn more about you through it. Just throughout this next couple weeks, please just allow us to remember and understand that we all have doubts. That, I mean, you don't shame us for those questions and for those doubts, and that you are going to be here through it all, even though you may not answer all those questions or those doubts that we have, Lord. Allow us to understand that within that, the biggest thing that we can take away is to continue to go towards you, to grow closer to you, to talk to you, to pray with you, to read with you, Lord. That at the end of the day, our relationship with you will not be faulted by not getting an answer or by being fearful because of our doubts, Lord. Allow us to know that you are there, that you are always there through the blessings and through the heartbreak, Lord, that you're never leaving our side. Allow us to just keep that faith in you and never let it falter, regardless of our circumstances, and knowing that that you'll always be there to help us and carry us and support us, regardless of what we're going through. Just know that we're thankful for you and all that you do. And in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Awesome. Make sure you join us again next week. We're going to close out this series on doubt, where we're actually going to be talking about the importance of community, which is why I'm really excited about how we close this series out, and kind of the finale of is, man, we have capacity to seek and search this stuff together. So I'm excited to close with that. But so join us again next week for that. Join us tonight at 8 o'clock for a Zoom call. It should be in your emails. You find it on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. If anything, shoot us a DM or a text or an email. We'll send you a direct link. So join that. It's going to be a little more of a small group setting for us to communicate and see each other's faces. But excited for that. Join us tonight, 8 o'clock on Zoom. Other than that, we love you guys. We're proud of you all. We're thankful for you all. And yeah, be blessed, and see you later.
Love you guys.